What if the most dangerous enemy humanity ever created was perfection itself? Every empire that's ever fallen Rome. Byzantium, even the Imperium's ancient forebears, collapsed, not because of weakness, but because they mistook discipline for destiny. And now, 10,000 years into the age of the Emperor, a single flaw inside the most perfect warriors in the galaxy threatens to expose that lie again. 40 million soldiers have died in his name. Countless worlds burned in pursuit of order. But what happens when one Ultramarine raised to be flawless begins to ask a forbidden question? What if perfection is the real corruption? They call me Brother Decius 4th Company Ultramarines. To most, that name means precision honor and absolute devotion to the Codex Astartes. But to me, it means silence. It means a lifetime of obeying, polishing, reciting, killing, until the word obedience becomes more sacred than life itself. The Codex tells us that perfection is possible through devotion, that a warrior without flaw serves the Emperor best. But perfection has a cost no one dares to mention. It's paid in fragments of the soul, one ritual, one verse, one order at a time. And when the last fragment is gone, what remains is not a man, but a weapon that can no longer dream. You've heard the legends of the Space Marines, the angels of death who never sleep, never hesitate, never fail. But what no record ever tells you is what they lose in the process: the ability to question, to feel, to remember why they fight in the first place. I was 11 when they came for me on Pandium, the bread world of Ultramar. They promised glory. They delivered ritual. They promised purpose. They delivered perfection. And perfection, I learned, kills slower than any enemy. For centuries, I served the Emperor's light, believing every verse of the Codex was divine truth. 1472 verses memorized perfectly. Every breath, every motion measured against doctrine. Until one day, for 1.7 seconds less than the blink of a mortal eye, I hesitated. I closed my eyes just long enough to remember that I was human once, and that single imperfection nearly destroyed me. The records say it was a microlapse. The apothecaries called it a defect in my catalepsian node. The chaplains called it spiritual weakness. But I know what it really was, the first heartbeat of freedom. They reconditioned me for 40 days, breaking my mind to rebuild my faith. They said it was mercy. It felt like erasure. Yet in that silence beneath the hum of pain stimulators and the endless recitation of the Codex, something refused to die. A whisper buried deep beneath the armor and the indoctrination. A voice that said, "You were not made to be perfect. You were made to choose." That whisper became a weapon. And when the next battle came on a mining world called Palman, I used it. I broke formation. I violated every protocol to save the lives of my brothers. And it worked. Disobedience saved the company. But in the eyes of the chapter, I had committed the one unforgivable sin I had thought for myself. Voice lowers tone. Intimate emotional pull for American audience. If you've ever served something greater than yourself, an idea, a uniform, a cause, you know that moment when duty and doubt collide. The fear of questioning what you've sworn your life to. The guilt of wondering if loyalty can coexist with conscience. That's where this story begins. Because my fall from grace was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of loyalty to something higher than the Codex. The Emperor didn't create us to be machines. He created us to protect humanity even from ourselves. But how do you protect humanity when you've been trained to forget what it feels like to be human? That's the paradox that haunted me through exile, through silence, through the years on Terra guarding children with the same vacant eyes I once had. And it's the question that brought me back when a new generation of Ultramarines, the Primaris, discovered something buried deep beneath a forgotten world, evidence that our perfect gene seed may not be pure at all. Perfection, corruption, and truth. 3 words that no warrior is ever meant to say in the same breath. Yet the closer I came to silence, the louder they became. Maybe that's the Emperor's cruelest lesson, that the price of perfection isn't glory, it's blindness. And when a single soldier dares to open his eyes, the entire Imperium must face what it truly is. They say perfection begins at birth. That's a lie. Perfection begins the moment someone decides which parts of you are worth keeping. On Pandium, the agri-world where I was born, the air smelled of soil and sunlight. Farmers rose with the dawn. Children learned the rhythm of harvests before they learned the alphabet. We were raised to serve, not to question. When the Ultramarine recruiters came, the world stopped to watch. To be chosen was an honor beyond comprehension, to ascend from mud to divinity. I was 11. My hands were raw from carrying grain sacks when they marked me for ascension. My mother tried not to cry because tears were weakness. My father simply said, "Serve well, son. Come back a legend." He didn't understand that legends don't come back. The journey to Macraga was a blur of steel corridors, antiseptic light, and whispers of greatness. The air smelled different, too clean, like the world had been scrubbed of imperfection. That was my first lesson. To serve the Emperor, you must be purified. The trials began immediately. We were no longer children, no longer names, just candidates stripped of identity and given a number. For months we ran until our hearts screamed, fought until our bones cracked, prayed until our minds went blank. The weak were discarded. The strong were reforged. When the gene seed implantation came, I believed it was a blessing. The apothecaries spoke of evolution, of becoming more than human. But what they never said was that to become more than human, you must first become less. The first night after surgery, I woke screaming, not from pain, but from silence. My heartbeat was slower, my breathing mechanical. I couldn't remember the sound of my own laugh. It had been replaced by the hum of machinery in my veins. They told us to rejoice. We were now vessels of purity, sons of Gilliman himself. But inside, something hollow echoed where laughter used to live. Days became drills, drills became rituals. 4 hours of weapons practice before sunrise. 2 hours of tactical simulation. 1 hour of meditative recitation of the Codex. Armor cleaning, fasting, confession, inspection. Every movement timed, every emotion measured. There was beauty in the precision, yes, but it was a beauty that consumed. To the Ultramarines, deviation is sin. Failure is heresy. Emotion is inefficiency. The chaplains recited verses as if they were oxygen. Through order comes strength. Through strength, perfection. Through perfection, eternity. We believed them, we had to. Because the alternative, the thought that we were trading our humanity for obedience, was too terrifying to face. One day during an indoctrination lecture, a young aspirant dared to ask a question. If perfection is eternal, why do we keep fighting? The room froze. The instructor didn't respond. The boy was gone the next day. His bunk was reassigned. His name removed from the roster. It was a quiet erasure, efficient, merciful, absolute. That was lesson 2. Questions are the seeds of failure. I learned quickly. I memorized the Codex verse by verse until my dreams became numbered stanzas of doctrine. I stopped wondering, stopped doubting, stopped remembering Pandium. They told us memory was weakness. The past was a battlefield you could never win. And so I surrendered it one fragment at a time until there was nothing left to surrender. But even perfection leaves traces of what it destroys. Sometimes in the stillness of meditation, I would see the fields of my home bathed in sunset. I would smell the grain, hear my mother's quiet humming. Then, like a machine correcting itself, the image would fade. My instructors called this mental noise. I called it mercy. The mercy of remembering what I was before they taught me to stop feeling. It was that small mercy, fragile, invisible, that would one day crack the armor of perfection itself, yet perfection never shatters all at once. It erodes quietly like water against stone. A single memory, a flicker of emotion, a heartbeat out of rhythm, and the system begins to tremble. For me, that tremor came in the form of silence. The silence of the reconditioning cell where perfection was reforged, and the human spirit was supposed to die. They called it reconditioning, a beautiful word for something designed to break you. The chamber was 8 feet by 8 feet. No color, no shadow, no escape. The air was recycled until it lost all scent. Even time dissolved. I sat cross-legged on the cold floor for 3 days, immobile, fed by intravenous drip, forbidden to speak, forbidden to think anything that wasn't the Codex. The only sound was my own breath echoing back at me as if the room itself was judging its rhythm. On the fourth day, the chaplain came. Cassius. His skull helm gleamed under the white light like a saint's death mask. "Brother Decius," he said, voice distorted through vox, "you house the sacred gene seed of Gilliman himself. Do you understand what that means?" My throat burned when I answered, "I do." "Then explain your failure." There is no correct answer to that question. The Codex offers no verse for hesitation, no ritual for doubt. I quoted scripture anyway, reciting the approved lines like an animal performing tricks. "Your understanding is incomplete," he said. "The flaw is not in your body, but in your spirit. You harbor doubt." He was right. Of course he was right. Every perfect soldier learns to hide uncertainty. I had simply failed to bury mine deep enough. "I will purge it," I said. "No," Cassius replied. "We will purge it together." What followed was 40 days of slow unmaking, 18 hours a day of chanting the Codex without water, without sleep. When my voice broke, they injected stimulants. When my focus drifted, electric needles in my skull brought me back. They called it purification. It felt like drowning in light. I began to see words instead of dreams, lines of doctrine crawling across the inside of my eyelids. Theoretical, a space marine knows no doubt. Practical, he exterminates it within himself. I repeated those lines until they stopped sounding like commands and started sounding like truth. Between sessions, they fed us visions, simulated battles where hesitation meant annihilation. They showed me heroes who questioned orders and how their doubt doomed entire legions. The lesson was simple: curiosity kills faster than bullets. Eventually, the pain stopped. Not because they relented, but because my mind adjusted. I became a closed circuit of obedience. Perfect, silent, empty. Yet deep beneath that silence, something still pulsed, a flicker of the boy from Pandium, who once looked up at the stars and wondered. They could cauterize flesh, but not memory. They could replace thought with doctrine, but not erase the echo of a heartbeat. That echo became my secret rebellion to survive without surrendering completely. When the chaplain finally declared me restored, I bowed, recited the proper verse, and felt nothing. That emptiness, they said, was purity, but I knew it was the calm before collapse. Perfection, once rebuilt, is brittle. It doesn't crack under battle. It fractures under meaning. The reconditioning cell taught me silence, but it also taught me how fragile obedience can be. All it takes is a single moment, a stray heartbeat, a human impulse, and the entire machine begins to falter. That moment came on the battlefield of Palman beneath a sky burning blue with betrayal. The planet Palman was nothing but rock and refinery smoke, an industrial scar on the edge of Ultramar. To the Codex, it was a simple operation purge, a rumored Tyranid nest, secure the mines, re-establish order. To us, it was routine. To me, it would become revelation. We dropped from orbit at dawn, drop pods screaming through atmosphere, the sky splitting open like a wound. As the retros fired and the impact locks released, I felt the tremor of duty rise within me, the familiar rhythm of precision. 4 hours of drills, 4 centuries of doctrine, all leading to this. The ramp dropped. Heat and dust swallowed the world. The first Tyranid shapes emerged from the haze. Small ones, scouts clawed silhouettes against the firelight. Perfect textbook engagement. Fire in measured bursts. Advance in quadrants. Maintain formation. Perfection in all things. But perfection that day was a lie. The enemy didn't fight as the Codex predicted. They withdrew, retreating into the mines instead of charging. Unexpected behavior, someone reported through Vox. The captain's response was pure scripture. The Codex prepares for all variables. Continue advance. Even then, the air felt wrong too, still too intentional. We followed protocol anyway. When the ambush came, it wasn't from the Tyranids at all. The Iron Warriors struck like ghosts of iron and hate their artillery opening the ground beneath us. The Codex had no page for that. Every order we followed fed their trap. Fallback patterns anticipated. Reinforcement corridors pre-sighted. Within minutes, perfect discipline became perfect slaughter. Through the haze of explosions, I saw the banners fall one by one. The captain barked orders drawn straight from doctrine, steady, unwavering, futile. I heard the voice in my head again, the one I thought I'd buried. If perfection cannot adapt, it will die perfect. My targeting systems flickered. Telemetry data was chaos. Vexillion's Primaris squad was trapped on a mining platform, cut off their signal, fading under enemy jamming. According to the Codex, relief was impossible. According to humanity, it was necessary. I broke rank. My gauntlet moved before thought. I commandeered a Thunderhawk with override codes I was never meant to use. Gamma 3 new coordinates, I said, transmitting the Iron Warrior's artillery positions. The servitor pilot obeyed blind to hierarchy. The captain's voice cut through the channel like a blade. Brother Decius, stand down. But I was already beyond obedience. The air lit up as the Thunderhawk's missiles fell, carving gaps through the enemy batteries. I watched the targeting icons vanish one after another. Vexillion's beacon flared alive again, extracted, saved. And in that moment, amid the noise and fury, I felt something I hadn't in years: choice. When the smoke cleared, victory was ours, but not the kind the Codex could celebrate. 78 brothers dead, hundreds maimed, and me alive, standing in defiance, knowing salvation had come not from perfection, but from heresy. In war, victory is never the end, only the beginning of judgment. The Codex had taught me how to win battles, not how to survive the aftermath. The reports called it deviation. The captain called it betrayal. And as the Thunderhawk's engines faded into silence, I understood the real battlefield wasn't on Palman's soil. It was inside the fortress of Hera, where obedience would again be tested, this time beneath the eyes of gods. The fortress of Hera loomed like a cathedral carved from the bones of gods. Inside, silence carried the weight of judgment. I stood unarmed, unarmored, stripped of every symbol that once defined me. Around me rose marble pillars, etched with 10,000 names, each one a brother who had died without question. I wondered how many of them had ever dared to doubt. The chamber was circular, an echo chamber of perfection. At its center stood the chapter master himself, Marneus Calgar, the living image of Guilliman's will. To his right, Chaplain Cassius' helmet still fashioned like a skull. To his left, Chief Librarian Tigurius, eyes blind, yet seeing more than any man should. Together they were the holy trinity of judgment, faith, authority, and knowledge. Brother Decius Calgar began, his voice metallic and calm. You stand accused of violating tactical doctrine during combat operations, usurping command authority, and endangering the chain of command. The words hung like chains themselves. How do you respond? There was no point denying it. The reports were perfect. The data slates showed my orders, the intercepted transmission, the deviation that saved lives yet broke faith. I acted to save my brothers, I said. The Codex had failed to anticipate the Iron Warrior's strategy. Doctrine could not save them. I could. The silence that followed was not disbelief, it was offense. Cassius' voice came next, colder than void steel. The Codex Astartes does not fail, Brother Decius. Only those who apply it without conviction. Conviction does not change artillery coordinates, I replied before I could stop myself. The enemy knew our patterns. They used our perfection against us. Cassius took a step forward, his shadow falling over me. You presume to lecture the chaplaincy on doctrine? You were reconditioned once before, were you not? Perhaps the lesson did not take. His words hit harder than any bolt round. I wanted to tell him that the reconditioning had worked too well, that it had burned away everything except the part of me that still cared. But the truth would sound like blasphemy. Tigurius intervened, his voice softer but heavy with unseen gravity. And yet he said Brother Decius's deviation altered the battle's outcome. His disobedience saved dozens of Ultramarines and neutralized key enemy artillery. These are facts. Calgar raised a hand. Facts are not in dispute, librarian. What we judge here is intent. He turned to me. Did you believe your judgment superior to the Codex? I believed my judgment necessary, I said. The Codex is a guide, not a prophecy. The chamber darkened as if even the lumens hesitated. To question the Codex was to question Guilliman himself. Cassius' voice cracked through the air. You speak treason with the calm of a saint. Do you think the Emperor smiles upon such arrogance? I met his gaze, the hollow sockets of that skull helm reflecting my face, no longer a soldier, just a man. I don't know what the Emperor smiles upon anymore, I said quietly. But I know he did not create us to die blind. Tigurius exhaled sharply, a sound between a sigh and a prayer. Calgar's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, an almost imperceptible flicker between anger and understanding. Finally, he spoke. Brother Decius, you were given the Emperor's greatest gift, the mind to follow orders without hesitation. Yet you have turned that gift into a weapon against your own chapter. He paused, then continued more softly. Still there are mitigating considerations. Cassius turned sharply. My lord, this deviation cannot be excused. Calgar ignored him. Brother Ancient Vexillion has submitted testimony crediting your actions with the survival of his squad. He believes your choice, though heretical in form, preserved the spirit of the Codex to protect humanity at all costs. The words stunned me. Vexillion, the Primaris who once mocked the rituals, had spoken in my defense. The irony was almost cruel. Calgar clasped his augmented hands before him. You will not be executed, Brother Decius, but you will no longer serve in the field. You are to be reassigned to the Scholastica Psychana on Terra as a guardian. Your mind is too unstable for war, but too valuable to discard. Exile, not death, but the slow erosion of purpose. A mercy worse than punishment. Cassius's final words sealed it. May the Emperor cleanse your soul of its doubt. But doubt was all I had left. As the chamber emptied, I remained standing alone beneath the statues of heroes, carved in unyielding perfection. I looked up at their faces and realized they were all expressionless, because the sculptor had never seen them alive. Perfection doesn't weep, it doesn't question. It doesn't feel, and as the great doors closed, I understood exile wasn't the end of my punishment. It was its perfection. They sent me away not to forget, but to remember in silence, to guard the dreams of others while my own turned to dust. Yet exile is never empty. It echoes with what the system fears most thought. And in the still corridors of Terra, where even the stars are hidden by smog, I would learn that silence can think for itself. Terra, the cradle of humanity, the tomb of its soul. From orbit, it looked less like a world and more like a scar of light, billions of cities piled atop one another, oceans drained, mountains carved into hive spires that clawed the sky. They called it the heart of the Imperium, but to me it pulsed like a dying thing beating only because the machinery refused to let it stop. My transfer was silent. No honors, no banners. Just two battle brothers who escorted me to a gunmetal shuttle, eyes fixed forward, neither hatred nor pity in their faces, only the stillness of those who obey. We said nothing on the journey. There was nothing left to say between one who still believed and one who had begun to see. When the warp storms finally spat us out into Sol, I saw the Emperor's light for the first time, not as a faith, but as physics. The Astronomicon burned across the void, its psychic brilliance piercing the dark like a wound that would never heal. And below it, the planet that built gods out of bureaucracy. The Scholastica Psychana was one of many such fortresses. A citadel of discipline and fear where young psychers' children barely old enough to dream were trained to serve or die. My new post was Simple Guardian, a title that once meant honor. Now it meant Watchman Custodian Relic. I patrolled corridors lined with brass sigils and stained glass portraits of saints who had never bled. The air smelled of incense and sterilizer of belief mixed with decay. Days blended into decades, each patrol the same. Each face a mirror of terror and obedience. I saw children dragged from dormitories to training halls, their minds probed, their souls tested like weapons in a forge. Some survived long enough to serve. Most vanished after evaluation. No screams, no funerals, just a name struck from a list. I told myself I was only a guard. That observation was not complicity. But I knew better. I recognized the pattern, the same machinery that had broken me now grinding new minds into obedience. The same prayers whispered not to the Emperor, but to control. And in their faces I saw Pandium again. I saw the boy I used to be, staring at the stars, dreaming of greatness, never realizing that greatness meant surrender. One day a training incident shattered the monotony. A girl 9 years old no more lost control during a telekinetic drill. A data slate flew from her hands, snapped an instructor's arm clean in two. Within seconds, gold-armored custodians appeared silent and terrible. They didn't scold. They didn't hesitate. They executed her with a single bolt shot to the skull. The children were made to watch. I didn't move. I couldn't. My armor might as well have been stone. That night, as the halls slept, I sat alone in my quarters, staring at the empty corner where she had stood earlier that day. Her death wasn't unique. It was procedure. But for the first time since reconditioning, the words of the Codex failed to silence my thoughts. Was this what perfection served? Was obedience the price of existence? In that silence, the fortress walls began to speak, not with words, but with what they contained: all the fear, all the devotion, all the little lies that kept a galaxy from collapsing under its own weight. And somewhere in that endless hum of prayer and machinery, something shifted inside me. Doubt, yes, but this time not shameful, not corrosive, living, like a pulse returning to a dead heart. I didn't write these thoughts, didn't speak them. The walls had ears, and the custodians had worse. But once a question forms in the mind, no conditioning can erase it. It grows in silence. It waits. Years passed like slow lightning. I became part of the structure, faceless, dependable, ignored. That was how survival worked here: be useful, be invisible. Yet every so often, when a child looked up at me with that same spark of frightened wonder, I wondered if my silence made me any different from the executioner. But silence, like faith, is fragile. It only lasts until someone speaks your name again. Mine came on the 12th year of exile, carried on the Vox like a ghost from another life. A summons from Ultramar itself, Captain Amon, my former judge, requesting my presence on Terra. Not for punishment this time, but for insight. Something had gone wrong again, and this time my heresy had become useful. When the message came, it didn't sound like an order. It sounded like a reckoning. Brother Decius the Vox crackled, the voice unmistakable, even through static. This is Captain Amon of the 4th Company. You are to report to the Chamber of Vigilance Scholastica Psychana at once. The title Brother hadn't been used in over a decade. It hit harder than any weapon. The Chamber of Vigilance was a sealed vault buried beneath the Psychana complex, a place reserved for secrets too dangerous for open air. As I entered, I saw them waiting: Captain Amon in his polished armor, Librarian Sayes beside him, and a small honor guard wearing the cobalt of Ultramar. For a heartbeat, I thought I was dreaming. Captain, I greeted, standing at perfect attention. To what end am I summoned? He regarded me with that same unreadable poise I remembered from the trial. A matter has arisen in the Palman sector. A Primaris contingent led by Brother Ancient Vexillion has ceased communication. They have altered patrol routes, detained an inquisitorial vessel, and are now operating beyond authorization. The name Vexillion cut through me like cold iron. The Primaris who had once defended me before Calgar. The one who'd whispered, "Perfection is the justification, not the demand." "You think he's turned traitor?" I asked. "We think he has done something worse," Ayman replied. "He has begun to think independently." That sentence told me everything. Ayman leaned closer. "You crossed that line once. He crosses it now. I need to understand what drives such deviation before we commit to resolution." He wasn't here to condemn me. He was here to understand me. For the first time in centuries, an Ultramarine wanted insight rather than obedience. "Very well," I said. "Tell me everything." As he explained, the pieces fell into place like broken gears grinding back into motion. 6 months prior, Vexillion's unit had intercepted a Mechanicus vessel leaving the Corinth system without authorization. The cargo sealed research samples from a geological excavation. When they forced entry, they found the entire research team dead and vials of preserved gene seed. But not their gene seed. The samples dated back 10,000 years from the era of the Horus Heresy. Genetic patterns didn't match any known loyalist chapter. They matched something erased. The lost legions, I whispered. Eamon's silence was confirmation. The Mechanicus logs were encrypted with command codes identical to those used by Ultramarine Higher Command. Not a perfect match, just different enough to allow denial. Worse, the Inquisition had already moved to seize the data-sending agents under the guise of investigating Genestealer infection. Vexillion refused to comply, Eamon said. He detained the Inquisitor's ship for 3 days, gathered evidence, and vanished from our network. It wasn't rebellion, it was containment. A man isolating a contagion before it consumed everything. So I said quietly, "You think he found something that threatens the Imperium itself?" "I think he found something the Imperium doesn't want found," Eamon replied. I studied the captain's face. The perfect mask of Ultramar discipline was there, but beneath it, something trembled. He feared this truth not because it was dangerous, but because it was unpredictable. "You've seen the data," I said. He nodded once. The gene seed traces show deliberate manipulation, fragments of multiple legions woven together, not random corruption, engineered design. And if these samples truly belong to the erased, then the purity of every chapter is a lie. The chamber seemed to shrink around us. For 10 millennia, the Adeptus Astartes had worshipped purity as divinity. To learn their bloodlines might be mongrel hybrids was not just heresy, it was apocalypse. "What do you intend to do?" I asked. "Recover Vexillion, retrieve the evidence, deliver it directly to Chapter Master Calgar." He hesitated, then added, "And perhaps to Guilliman himself." Guilliman, the returned Primarch, the architect of the Codex Astartes. The irony was exquisite, the creator of perfection summoned to judge its corruption. "You'll need my help," I said. Eamon didn't argue. "You understand deviation better than anyone alive." And so I was reattached to the Fourth Company, not as a brother reborn, but as a ghost lent back to the machine. My armor unpainted ceramite, no insignia, no honors, the color of nothing. We descended on Corinth III, a windswept agri-world where Vexillion's forces had entrenched around a research outpost. He didn't try to hide, he wanted to be found. His Vox transmission was simple: Fourth Company, you are acknowledged. Land at these coordinates. Captain Eamon and 2 others may approach. Any additional deployment will be considered hostile. Eamon turned to me. "You will come with me." We landed in silence. The fields stretched for miles, golden and empty, the wind whispering like ghosts of the farmers who once lived there. Vexillion waited inside the outpost, standing among shattered equipment and shattered truths. When we entered, he saluted with perfect form. "Captain, Brother Decius." I wondered how long it would take. "Explain yourself," Eamon demanded. Vexillion turned, activating a hololithic projector. Above the table floated a rotating strand of DNA, alien yet familiar. "We found this beneath the bedrock. Gene seed 10,000 years old, but not decayed. Preserved. And not ours." Librarian Cease leaned forward. "Its origin unknown," Vexillion said. "But analysis shows fragments of ultramarine markers interlaced with others, unidentifiable or deliberately obscured. I believe they belong to the 2 lost legions." The room fell silent. Even Eamon's composure cracked. "If what you claim is true," he said, "then our purity is compromised. Our identity was never purity." Vexillion interrupted. It was survival rewritten as faith. The Mechanicus sought to erase this proof. The Inquisition moved to bury it. I refused. "You defied command," Eamon said sharply. "I obeyed purpose," Vexillion countered. "To serve humanity, not the bureaucracy that cages it." His words echoed my own thoughts from Pullman. The same heresy, the same truth. Eamon exhaled slowly. "Then come with us. Present your findings to Calgar. Let the truth be judged properly." Vexillion regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. "On one condition. Decius accompanies us as witness. The chapter once punished him for seeing what others would not. He deserves to see how deep the blindness goes." Eamon's gaze turned to me, unreadable. "Do you accept this role I will serve as required?" I said the same words I'd spoken at every turning point of my life, but this time they didn't sound like submission. They sounded like a promise. As the Thunderhawk lifted from Corinth's soil, carrying us toward Macraga and the waiting judgment of gods, I looked once more at the swirling helix suspended in Vexillion's hands. 10,000 years of silence encoded in blood, truth fossilized beneath perfection. Whatever awaited us, I knew one thing this time: the trial would not be about obedience. It would be about the cost of pretending to be pure in a universe built on compromise. The journey back to Macraga was quiet, the kind of silence that thickens around men who have seen too much. Even the Thunderhawk's engines seemed restrained, as if the machine spirit itself understood the weight of what we carried. Between Aemon's rigid calm and Vexillion's defiant stillness, I sat suspended between two worlds: faith and doubt, duty and truth. For the first time in centuries, I no longer knew which side I belonged to. When the fortress of Hera appeared through the cloud cover, I felt the same chill that had followed me into exile, the same marble spires, the same iron stillness. But this time, I wasn't here as a condemned man. I was the carrier of a disease the chapter feared more than chaos knowledge. We disembarked in ritual formation. The air was cold, thin, immaculate. Calgar awaited us in the Hall of Oaths, surrounded by banners older than memory. The codex itself was displayed behind him, bound in ceramite and gold, illuminated by flickering lumen strips like candles for a god. Captain Aemon, Brother Ancient Vexillion, Guardian Decius Calgar said each name like a gavel. You return from the Palman sector bearing grave accusations and unverified data. Speak. Vexillion stepped forward, armor gleaming with the dull sheen of restraint. My lord, what we bring is truth. Gene seed recovered from beneath the Corinth strata, unaltered, verified, and ancient. It carries markers of the lost legions. The Mechanicus sought to destroy it, the Inquisition to bury it. I acted to preserve it. Cassius was there too, his skull helm fixed upon Vexillion like a weapon. You acted without sanction. You detained Imperial vessels. You risked schism. Vexillion didn't flinch. I acted because the alternative was ignorance. Tigurius's blind gaze turned toward me. And you, Brother Decius, you have seen this evidence yourself. Yes, I said, and I believe it's genuine. A ripple of unease spread through the hall. Calgar's jaw tightened. Do you understand what you suggest? That the Ultramarines, the sons of Guilliman, carry blood tainted by the lost and the damned? I suggest, I said carefully, that purity is not the absence of flaw, but the ability to endure it. Cassius exploded. That is heresy wrapped in poetry. Perhaps, I replied, but heresy built this Imperium as surely as faith sustains it. The Primarchs themselves defied the Emperor's first design. Guilliman didn't create the Codex to enslave thought, he wrote it to protect it. That sentence landed like a thunderbolt. Even Aemon's composure fractured. Calgar's augmetic fingers flexed the servo joints, whining softly. Tigurius' voice cut through the tension. And if this truth were confirmed, what then? Would you have us dismantle 10,000 years of belief? Tell every chapter their sacred bloodlines are impure? Vexillion's tone was steady, almost gentle. I would have us remember that the Emperor built warriors, not statues. That humanity survives not because of perfection, but because of its capacity to adapt. Calgar's silence stretched into eternity. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Finally he spoke, voice low, heavy. You ask for balance between faith and reason, obedience and truth. And yet both paths lead to ruin. Without order, we fall to chaos. Without truth, we become it. He approached each step, echoing against the marble. Do you know what Guilliman would say if he stood here now? Vexillion met his gaze without fear. That the Codex was never meant to replace his sons' hearts. For a moment, Calgar's mask cracked. Beneath the iron discipline was something weary human. Then he turned away. The evidence will be sealed and presented to Guilliman himself. Until he decrees otherwise, this matter does not exist. You will speak of it to no one. It was both mercy and suppression, of victory written in invisible ink. As the hall emptied, I found myself standing beside Vexillion, the silence between us not of defeat, but of exhausted triumph. "Do you think he'll tell the Primarch the truth?" I asked. Vexillion watched Calgar's retreating form. "Perhaps. But truth doesn't need a Herald Decius. It only needs witnesses." And in that instant, I understood we hadn't failed. We had planted a seed, a forbidden one buried deep in the soil of perfection. Someday it would bloom. That night, as I stood on the fortress ramparts watching Macraga's twin moons rise, I realized that even silence has its own rebellion. We hadn't torn down the system we'd made it blink. The Codex still ruled, but it no longer felt eternal. And for the first time I understood what Guilliman's true legacy might be. Not obedience, but the courage to look upon imperfection and still choose to serve. Weeks passed before the halls of Macraga quieted again, though the air never lost its tremor. No one spoke of Corinth, of the lost gene seed, or of what we'd carried across the stars, but in the silence, the chapter changed. You could feel it in the way brothers hesitated half a heartbeat longer before quoting the Codex, or in the way chaplains now spoke with more thunder, as if raising their voices could drown the whisper of truth. I was not detained this time. There were no cells, no reconditioning. Instead, Calgar himself summoned me privately. The chamber was small, lit only by the soft glow of hololithic script from the Codex Astartes. He regarded me for a long moment before speaking. "You remind me," he said, "that the line between loyalty and rebellion is thinner than any blade I've ever carried. Guilliman once said that the mind must serve, but it must also question, or else it ceases to be human. You and Vexillion have forced that truth back into daylight." He paused, his eyes gleaming beneath the blue-white light. "But daylight," he added, "is not always mercy. There will be those who call this heresy, and there will be others who quietly find strength in it. That is how real change begins in this Imperium, never with declarations, only with cracks." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like defiance or gratitude. Calgar dismissed me with a nod, and I knew in that instant that my war as an Ultramarine was over. Yet the battle I had begun, the one inside hearts and doctrines, was only starting. Vexillion departed soon after his Primaris detachment reassigned under direct scrutiny. We didn't say farewell. We didn't need to. Our bond was forged not in shared faith, but in shared fracture. We both understood that the Imperium doesn't reward clarity. It endures it. I left Macrag aboard a transport bound for the Eastern Fringe, reassigned as strategic liaison, a title vague enough to mean exile without the shame of the word. It suited me. I had walked the entire circle, from indoctrination to rebellion, from punishment to reluctant reverence. Sometimes, as the ship drifted through the void, I would stand before the viewing port and watch the stars burn. Each one a fragment of something larger, imperfect, and alive. In their flicker, I saw the truth that the Codex had tried to bury. Perfection is not divinity, it's paralysis. I thought of the children on Terra, their wide eyes reflecting fear and faith in equal measure, of the boy on Pandium running beneath 3 moons unbroken and unmeasured, of the man I had become standing alone in a galaxy that demanded unity and punished thought. Perhaps Guilliman, in his infinite discipline, foresaw this paradox. Perhaps he knew that only when perfection breaks can purpose breathe again. Maybe that's why he returned, not to restore an empire, but to remind his sons that obedience without reflection is simply another form of rot. The Codex still endures. It always will. But I have learned that the truest verse in its endless pages is the one unwritten. Perfection is not the goal. Humanity is. And if the Emperor watches from his throne, I hope he forgives his children, not for our flaws, but for the moments we dared to confront them. Because in that defiance lies the only kind of perfection worth dying for. Somewhere beyond Ultramar's borders, rumors already whisper of unrest of Primaris legions, asking questions they were never meant to ask of archivists, unearthing records long erased. I do not know if Vexillion still fights, or if his name has been struck from the rolls, but I know this ideas once awakened do not sleep again. And across this endless grim darkness, the sound of thinking has become its own quiet rebellion. And so, if there is one lesson carved from the scars of my service, it is this: the Imperium does not fear chaos, it fears change. Every tyrant cloaked in faith, every saint carved from steel, every law written in the name of order, they all exist to silence the one thing that can outlast them, a single unbroken question. I was forged to kill heretics. I became one to remember why I fought. And if the Emperor truly still watches from that golden throne, then perhaps his greatest warriors were never those who obeyed without hesitation, but those who hesitated long enough to see. If you've ever wondered whether loyalty and truth can coexist, remember this: even the strongest armor cracks from the inside first. That's where the light gets in. So ask, question, reflect, because the moment you stop thinking, someone else begins deciding what you should die for. In the grim darkness of the far future, where blind obedience masquerades as faith, the smallest act of thought becomes an act of war. And maybe that's where salvation begins, not with another battle, but with the courage to think the unthinkable. If this story made you feel something, doubt, defiance, or even a spark of understanding, don't let it fade. Share it. Comment what you think perfection really means, because somewhere out there, another brother is still reciting the Codex in his sleep, waiting for someone brave enough to question the next verse.